True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
Back in 1999, Leann and Michael Fletcher were just beginning to grow their family, as Michael was busy building his career as an attorney. That August, the couple left their daughter Hannah with Leann's parents. Michael took Leann to the shooting range to teach her how to shoot a gun. Afterwards, taking advantage of the free babysitting, they returned home and had afternoon sex. What happened next would destroy both of their families. In the aftermath of an unexpected and shocking death, problems in the Fletcher marriage were exposed. Leann had recently learned that she was pregnant, reuniting with Michael after a lengthy separation. She had high hopes for the future. Michael had been a really doting husband for the past several months, but his loving gestures had raised some eyebrows, especially those of Leann's mother. Join us at the quiet end for Bedroom Betrayal. Was Michael Fletcher a loving father looking forward to the birth of a second child? Or was he an unfaithful, lying, cold-blooded man with a long-planned scheme to get away with murder?
Well, it's time for Michigan beer, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And I hope people aren't tired of me always picking beers from Founders Brewing. Got another one. This one's called Canadian Breakfast Stout. It's 11.3% alcohol by volume. Kind of a big boy. Pitch black color, nice mocha head, little bit of lacing, beautiful aroma. Maple syrup, chocolate, coffee, and some alcohol. And it's got a taste just like you'd expect from that aroma. Maple syrup, chocolate, coffee, and bourbon. This coated my tongue like a sweet blanket. It's so good.
I love the imagery. I can't wait to try it. Let's open it. All right, Dickie, come sit by me.
It's just you and me.
Not much moving to different ends of the bar necessary at this point.
No, we can sit anywhere we want in the bar.
That's right.
And do this program.
Yep.
So Leann Fletcher was born to Jack and Gloria Meisner in 1970. She is the fifth child with 3 older sisters and 1 older brother. Jack and Gloria had grown up just a few houses apart in Hazel Park, Michigan. Jack was friends with Gloria's brother, and Gloria was friends with Jack's sister. Now, there's nearly 6 years age difference between them, so they really didn't show any interest in each other until they were adults. During the Korean War, Jack spent 1.5 years in Japan. When he returned home, he noticed Gloria at a neighborhood party. She was 16, he was 21. So they began hanging out with groups of friends, and they finally started dating at the local drive-in and square dancing together. A year later, they were engaged. They were engaged for 3 years and got married in 1958.
Yes, so their first child, a boy, they named Chris. He was born in 1959. They had all daughters after that in 1960, 1964, 1965, and finally Leann in 1970.
Do you think she might have been a mistake? 5 years between pregnancies there?
Oh, mistake is a harsh word.
Okay,
She might have been a bit of a surprise. Yeah, but you know, those older kids were super excited when they learned about Gloria's pregnancy with Leann. And this was still at a time where many people had a lot of kids. So while Gloria was still in the hospital after Leann was born, they all made these welcome home signs. The kids were so eager to take care of her. She was like a real live baby doll, just surrounded by love and attention in her family. Leann grew up in the suburbs after spending her earlier years in the city, but Michael Fletcher grew up in farm country. He was the oldest of 3 children. Known to everyone as Mick, he was well behaved and he did well in school. His parents, John and Darla, were very conservative, evangelical Christians. So the family went to services at least twice a week, sometimes 3 or 4. But by the time Mick was in the 2nd grade, He was reading at a 12th grade level, so he was a smart kid.
I find that a little hard to believe.
Okay.
10 years above grade level?
I know. Smart.
Uh-huh.
Smart or exaggerated, however you want to look at it.
Yeah, I think that might have been more wistful thinking on someone's part.
Okay. Well, his sister Amy was a singer. She had a real talent for that. And she won a singing contest in Nashville and was actually named the Child Vocalist of the Year. After that, the family entertained people at various churches. Mick taught himself how to play the piano. Darla was the one who booked their gigs, and John, the father, handled the equipment. When Amy was 10, the family actually released an album of contemporary Christian music. Mick played football in high school, but then he quit to make money at various fast food jobs, so the album wasn't a big money maker. At age 16, Pizza Hut made him a part-time assistant manager, which was really good for a kid that young.
Yeah, he must have had some get up and go.
I think he did. After he graduated, he went to a community college with the goal of becoming a policeman. He majored in criminal justice, and after just 2 years, where he got his associate's degree, he transferred to Michigan State. So Leann met Mick in 1990 at a party. Her family liked him when they met him. He was clean-cut and about to graduate from Michigan State. So they got married in 1993. Leann supported Mick financially all through law school, with the whole plan, what she was looking forward to, was becoming a stay-at-home mom, and he would support them. So they moved to Hazel Park, and they had a daughter in 1996. After their daughter Hannah was born, she was Leann's focus. Coming from a happy childhood with many siblings, Leann wanted a big happy family of her own. She worked as a phone solicitor and as a nail technician. She was also, though, kind of a poet and an artist. She made ceramic and porcelain crafts that she sold at craft fairs. And over time, she had gotten a talent for gourmet cooking.
So Jenny Hughes was Leann's best friend from the time they first met in 1992. She had described Leann as a happy person who was easily excited. When the two women joined a bowling league together, they had a lot of fun. Each time Leann bowled a strike, she would celebrate by jumping up and down. And when the league ended, Leann was given a patch for being the most improved bowler. Everyone agreed that Leann was madly in love with Mick. When they had rough times in their marriage, and there were some, Leann was always quick to forgive him and take him back. And when he came back to her for the last time, after separation in the spring of 1999, she did waver a bit, but in the end her feelings went out. She loved him, and she wanted to have a family with him.
Sure. So it was Thursday, August 12th, 1999, when Leann took a home pregnancy test, and she was just elated because she found out she was going to have a second baby. But, there was a little bit of a dark shadow to that because her marriage to Mick had been rocky for at least the past 2 years. But she loved nothing more than being a mother, and she really hoped that Mick would be as excited as she was. Since that spring, when they had reconciled, Mick had been attentive in everything she wanted in a husband. That Saturday, August 14th, Leann and Mick double-dated with her sister Lindy and Lindy's husband. They were going to dinner, followed by a movie. Leann hadn't told Lindy about her pregnancy yet and was really excited to do it that night. Leann had also called her best friend Jenny and invited her and her husband, but Jenny said they couldn't come because her husband had to work. So before the date, Leann and Lindy made plans over the phone. The Sixth Sense was playing at the nearby Oakland Mall, and they had both heard really good things. So they decided they would eat at the nearby Red Robin and then go see that movie.
And so Lindy, her husband Mark, Mick, Leann, and Hannah all met at the Red Robin. Now, as Leann and Mick had planned, Hannah gave them the news about the new baby. Leann was just 3 or 4 weeks along, but there was no way she could keep it a secret. She just had to tell people. She talked about moving the family to a bigger house, and Mick said, "Oh, I might need to have a second job." Mick had been recently out of law school and was working as an assistant prosecutor, but he wasn't exactly known as a go-getter. He was good at making contacts, but he wasn't much of a worker, and he often left the office after working half a day.
Yeah, so more of a schmoozer than a real hard worker, which can get you pretty far, really.
Well, they can, but if you're working in a prosecutor's office, you need to do something, make a name for yourself, stand out. You have to work harder.
Right. Well, he was trying to do that other ways.
I guess so.
After they ate dinner at the Red Robin, Mick and Leann drove to Leann's parents' house. They dropped off Hannah there so the parents could watch her while they went and saw the movie. They really enjoyed the movie and the twist at the end, which I won't spoil the movie.
And just in case there's someone out there that's never seen it.
That's right.
We won't spoil the ending.
Nope. When they walked out to their cars, Leann asked Lindy and Mark to come to the Meisner's house so she could tell her parents about her pregnancy with them there. She really wanted her sister to be there. Lindy was tired and wanted to go home, but she just couldn't help doing it because she was really drawn in by Leann's excitement, and Leann was the baby of the family. She didn't get turned down very often by her siblings. So once they got to Leann's parents' house, Hannah said her lines again, just as she'd been taught, and Jack and Gloria were thrilled. They really liked being grandparents. Jack had recently retired, and he'd even traded in his car for a minivan just so he could drive his grandkids around. So he was happy to hear that he was going to have another one. He knew that Leann was an excellent mom, and they also knew that it was her dream to stay home and have a big family. So this was all in Leann's plans. But before they went home, Leann and Mick made plans to go to church with the Meisners the next morning, and then they would all have dinner together Sunday night. Mick said this would be his treat, and they would go to Outback Steakhouse. This chain restaurant was very popular in the area, and the Meisners had meant to give it a try. They hadn't been there yet, so they happily accepted this offer.
Sunday's plans were a happy surprise, but there was a bigger surprise left on Jack and Gloria's kitchen table. Leann had borrowed a total of $2,500 from her parents over the last couple of years in order to keep up with the bills. They didn't expect to be paid back, but Leann left a check for the full amount in an envelope in their kitchen, along with a note reading, "Dinner comes with this." So they must have been helping her out when she was separated from her husband.
Yeah, and I think when they were together, too, they were kind of living beyond their means because his career was just starting out. He wasn't making a lot of money.
Yeah, and she probably wasn't making much money doing nails and ceramics.
No, that was very part-time anyway. So the next day, Jack drove the 5 of them to the Outback Steakhouse about 5 p.m., and there was a line out the door, but Leann managed to get them a table in the bar area right away so they didn't have to wait. So they got back to the Meisner's house at 7 p.m. and hung around for a little bit. But then the Fletchers prepared to go home and get Hannah to bed. While Leann and her mom went into the house to get a sippy cup with something for Hannah to drink, Mick spoke to Jack. He asked Jack if he would be home the next day because he wanted Jack and Gloria to babysit Hannah while he and Leann went to the firing range for an hour or so. So this was surprising to Jack because he knew that his daughter just hated guns. So he exchanged a look with Leann when she came out of the house, but did agree to watch Hannah. It was really odd for Leann to agree to go shooting, and even odder that Mick was the one to ask them to babysit. In the entire 6 years that he had been married to their daughter, Mick had never asked them to babysit. It had always been Leann who made those plans.
So the Fletchers got back to their house in about 20 minutes. Mick told Leann that he had some work at his office he had to wrap up for a hearing the next morning. He said he'd be home soon, and Leann took Hannah inside. But Mick didn't go to his office. He went to Judge Susan Krazanowski's house, had sex with her, and told her that he loved her.
The plot thickens.
So the following day was Monday, August 16th. It was pretty hot and humid. Mick was out of the house at 8:55 for a 9 a.m. pretrial hearing. He left court at 10, returned to his office, then drove to a Rite Aid store where he bought a Coke for himself and a greeting card for Leann. When he arrived at his house at 10:30, Leann had been lying on the couch getting over some morning sickness. Now Mick was supposed to go back to work that afternoon. Leann planned to pick up Hannah at her parents' house and meet her sister Lindy for a walk in the park. She got off the phone with Lindy just as Mick entered the house. Now, Mick gave her the card he had bought, and she was pretty happy. She opened it, read it, and put it in her purse to read again later, and to show to her sister and her mom. It really did seem like Mick was a changed man.
Yeah, so the print on the front of the card read, "My love, when I met you, I had no idea how much my life was about to be changed. But then, how could I have known? A love like ours happens once in a lifetime. You were a miracle to me, the one who was everything I had ever dreamed of, the one I thought existed only in my imagination. And when you came into my life, I realized that what I always thought was happiness couldn't compare to the joy loving you has brought me." And on the inside, Mick wrote, "Leann, I might not always tell you, but you mean the world to me. I love you so much, sweetheart, and a boy or a girl, so long as they are part of you, our children will all be beautiful. I love you." So super sweet.
Yes, gaggingly so.
Well, I don't know about that. I don't think Leann saw it that way at all.
No, she was excited and happy.
So Mick and Leann drove separate cars to the Meisners so that Mick could drop off Leann after they visited the shooting range. When they arrived there, Jack and Gloria met them out front. Leann and Mick went in for a couple of minutes and said that they would only be gone for an hour or so. Mick would drop off Leann and return to work that afternoon. Leann and Hannah would then meet Lindy for a walk. So Jack and Gloria asked if they could join their daughters on that walk. And Leann said sure. Then just as Leann was walking back to the car, her mom pulled her aside, and Gloria asked her why she was going to the firing range. It just was totally out of character. But Leann told her mom that Mick really wanted her to get to know how to shoot in case she ever needed to use the gun for protection. "He's been so good lately, Mom," she said. "I want to keep him happy." So jokingly, but you know how many jokes have a little hint of truth in them, Gloria asked Leann if Mick had taken out an extra insurance policy on her. Leann just rolled her eyes and laughed and said, "Oh, Mom, he's not going to shoot me." So it was 11:50 a.m. when Mick and Leann left the house for the firing range, which was just 5 minutes away from her parents' house.
Yeah, at the firing range, people there noticed Leann and how uncomfortable she seemed to be handling the gun. Now, it was a big gun, a .45 caliber pistol, and it had quite a recoil. So Mick and Leann left at about 12:15, so they're only there for like 15 minutes. They didn't do much.
No, it wasn't really a serious thing, was it?
No, and I don't think Leann was really into it, right?
No, by all accounts, no. She was just trying to make him happy.
Yeah, but it was obvious enough that they left fairly soon. Now, instead of heading straight back to his in-laws' house, Mick drove them back to their place, and according to what he said later, he and Leann had decided to take advantage of their time alone and stop home for a quickie. They arrived at their house at 12:30, 12:35, and around there. What exactly happened at the house is not certain at all. Leann would be found in her small bedroom, without her pants or underwear, shot to death through her right ear. Her brain stem was severed, and she fell to the carpet with a pool of blood building around her upper body.
Yeah, so it was 12:48 when Mick Fletcher called 911 and reached the Hazel Park police station. He did sound hysterical. Between gasps and cries, he said that his wife had shot herself. According to Mick, he had gone into the bathroom after having sex in the bedroom. He was in there when the gun went off. When he came out of the bathroom, he found Leann shot dead. He had then run out of the room and called 911. He told the operator that he couldn't even be in that bedroom, so he was outside smoking a cigarette. At 12:52, Hazel Park police officer Ronald Lehman arrived at the Fletcher house, and Mick was on the front porch. When the officer approached Mick, he said, "She's inside." When asked what had happened, Mick said that she shot herself in the back bedroom.
As more officers arrived, one of them was assigned to stay with Mick, and the others went into the house. House smelled of gunpowder. There was a large target hung up over the living room couch, with a figure crouching down and pointing a gun. There were 5 holes in the bullseye. The target had been shot about 40 times, and this was the target that Leann and Mick had shot at earlier that day. Once in the bedroom, Lehman crouched down and checked Leann for a pulse. There wasn't any. She was sprawled out on the carpet with a giant pool of blood surrounding her. She was naked from the waist down, wearing socks, a bra, and a tank top. There were streaks of blood on her face and beneath her chin. She was lying at an angle beside the bed, with part of her left foot beneath the bed. The gun was lying near her right arm, and a magazine with several bullets in it was lying near the gun. The bedroom was actually quite small. There was a gun safe, a computer desk, and a bed. The computer desk was spattered with blood.
So after the paramedics showed up and they pronounced Leann dead, they left the scene. Investigators took photos of the scene and gathered evidence. Her body was taken from the house to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy that would be done the next morning. Leann was wrapped in a sheet and put into a body bag, but her hands were not bagged to preserve evidence. It was 2 p.m. when her body was taken away from the house. Mick recounted what had happened with a detective outside. They had gone to the gun range, then come home to play around. He had gone into the bathroom to pee before putting the gun away, and while he was in the bathroom, he heard the gunshot. He came out, he said, and he found Leann on the floor. He said that he may have moved one of her arms, but he couldn't remember.
Detective Welch, who was the first homicide detective at the scene, asked Mick to come with him to the police station to make a statement. Mick seemed genuinely upset, crying and asking what he was going to tell his daughter. He cried for the entire 4-block drive to the station, and when they arrived, he had to be helped out of the car and walk down the steps into the interview room.
Yeah, so he really seemed like a grieving spouse, someone that was in shock.
Yeah, he certainly was acting like the grieving husband, wasn't he?
He was, and I think that they were giving him the benefit of the doubt for quite a while until they spoke with Leann's family, really.
And Gloria set them straight.
Yeah, exactly.
So as Mick was making his statement, Welch took notes. The interview lasted about an hour. According to Mick, when they got home from the gun range, Leann carried the gun case and he carried the target and a bag of ammunition. Leann set the gun case on the bed and went to the bathroom. While she was in there, he loaded the clip and began to load a second clip. He got 2 or 3 bullets in before Leann came out of the bathroom. Then he handed the clip to her and asked her to finish loading it. Mick then went into the bathroom, ran some water, undid his belt, and heard the gunshot. I thought he would find Leann standing there with a hole in the bedroom wall, but instead he saw her bleeding on the floor.
Yeah, once he found her, he said that he did grab her right arm and roll her over, and he saw the wound on the right side of her head. That's when he called 911. At 3:30 p.m. that day, Mick had written out this 1-page statement. The scene at the Fletcher house appeared staged to some of the more experienced detectives. At 4:15 p.m., they got a search warrant for any evidence of the shooting and any items with blood on them, and this included the home computer. Meanwhile, by 1:30, Leann's parents had begun to worry. Leann had a cell phone, but she hadn't called to say she would be late. By 3 p.m., they were very nervous. Leann would never leave her daughter with them and not call to say that she was going to be late, so they started to think that something bad must have happened. Jack was sitting in his living room when he saw the Troy police cruiser pull into his driveway. His heart really sunk as the second cruiser pulled in behind the first. The police officers knocked on the front door, identified themselves, and came inside. They told Leann's parents that their daughter had been in an accident. At first, Gloria and Jack thought of a car accident, and they hoped that she was at the hospital and she would be fine. But then they were told that there had been a shooting, and Gloria's immediate reaction to that was to say, "Oh my God, Jack, he shot her." Her apparent certainty about this really made the police pay attention. The officers gave Gloria the phone number to Detective Welch at the station and told them to call him.
Yeah, so when Jack called, Welch asked him to come down to the police station. He did not go into any details over the phone. Jack was pretty freaked out, but Gloria was surprisingly composed. And she was more angry than sad, at least initially. She knew her daughter must be dead, or they would have been sent to a hospital to see her. Her first thought was that Mick had somehow shot her at the gun range. She was worried that he was smart enough to get away with it. So the Meisners put Hannah in her car seat and drove to the police station. When they arrived, they were directed down a flight of stairs to the basement. and an officer took Hannah into a room with toys and stuffed animals. Then Welch told them that Leann was dead. Both parents were visually upset, but Gloria got it together, looked Welch straight in the eyes, and said that son of a bitch killed her.
So right away she thought this. Well, not only thought it, but felt pretty sure about it, it seems.
Yeah, she wasn't mincing words, was she?
No, but it would become a bit of an issue if maybe she had veered the police in that direction inappropriately and they'd overlooked other possibilities. Which I don't really think so, but we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Jack, Leann's dad, was more in shock and just couldn't speak. But Gloria's words, they did have a lot of power with investigators. So I really do think she made them look more deeply into Mick's statement and actions than they may have otherwise.
Well, sure, but they're not going to just go on her say-so.
Well, no, but it made them think of that when maybe they weren't really thinking of that. Of course, they always have to consider it.
Yes.
Yes.
And he's a spouse or a significant other, so he's going to be suspect anyway.
Yes, but if Gloria had said, "Oh my God, poor Mick, he would never want her to be hurt. He adores her," it might have been a little different.
Maybe.
At least initially. But here's Gloria's written statement. Leann and Mick had a rocky relationship for the past 2 years. Mick has left 3 or 4 times, but always talked her into taking him back. She's a loving mother and wife. She suspected he was having an affair, but could never prove it. He turned from a loving husband after the first few years to a cold and distant person. He wanted to file for divorce, and we loaned her the money for a lawyer. The day he was served, he started sending her flowers again and wanted her to take him back. He said he had changed. So out of consideration for their daughter Hannah, Leann gave him one more chance. He's gone overboard on the loving husband routine, and when he asked us to watch Hannah for 1 hour today while he showed her how to shoot a gun, I said to her before they left, "Leann, has he taken out a new insurance policy on you?" And she laughed and said, "Mother, he's not going to shoot me. But he was trained at a police academy and can handle guns. This was no accident."
So Welch talked to the Meisners for over half an hour, and none of Mick's story was making much sense to him. Welch thought it was suspicious that the first time Nick had asked his in-laws to babysit, and the first time he had ever taken his wife to a firing range, she ended up dead. The Meisners left the station with Hannah. They had been kept apart from Mick and had no desire at all to talk to him.
Gloria's certain and very pointed anger energized the detectives in investigating Leann's death. According to law, the detectives at the scene had a right to be in the bedroom and take anything in plain view that they thought was evidence. A search warrant was needed for the rest of the house, though. If this was a murder, searching the house and the computer could probably give them a motive. So by the end of the week, Mick had hired an attorney and he had stopped talking. When Gloria and Jack returned home from the police station, Gloria got on the phone to contact the rest of the family and give them the horrible news. She wanted to be able to tell them in person. Her second youngest daughter, Lisa, had just gotten home with her husband, Mike. Mike answered the phone and he told Lisa that something had happened and they needed to go to her parents' house immediately. Lisa was terrified, knowing that it had to be really bad for her mom to ask them to come over without giving an explanation. When they pulled up to the house, Gloria ran out of the house with her cell phone in one hand. Lisa called Lindy's house and got no answer. Then she called her husband's cell phone and got no answer. Then she called Lindy's cell phone and finally found her. She was in the middle of the checkout lane at the grocery store. So Lisa asked, "Where are you? Just leave the cart, walk outside, we're going to come pick you up." So Lindy didn't know what was going on, of course. She protested for a moment, but soon realized that something serious must be going on. So she waved to a passing employee, said that she had an emergency and she was sorry, but she was going to have to leave her cart full of groceries. Then she ran outside to wait to be picked up by her family. While she waited for her sister, Lindy called Gloria. She asked if it was her dad, and Gloria said, "No, just get over here."
Jill, what did you put in the blender?
My Bluetooth earbuds. If I hear another piece of shit commercial, I'm going to scream.
That's a little extreme, don't you think? I can't help you with other podcasts, but all of our True Crime Brewery episodes now come with commercial-free versions for our Tie Grabber subscribers.
Well, I know. My hate for ads is what motivated me to give Tie Grabber members that ad-free option. If you subscribe at tiegrabber.com, you get to listen to all of our new episodes commercial-free, and this is in addition to our bonus episodes every month. Plus, you get some great TCB swag mailed to you when you join.
Okay, I get it. At least TCB listeners can avoid ads. Just turn off the damn blender. You're going to wake up the whole neighborhood.
Okay. I'm sorry for swearing.
Not a fucking problem.
After Lindy hung up, she decided that Leann must have had a miscarriage. Lisa and Mike pulled up, and she got into their car. Then they got to the Meisner's house and ran inside. Lindy saw her dad standing there, and she felt relieved for just a few seconds. Then Gloria came up to her and said, "Mick's murdered Leann. Mick shot Leann. He murdered her."
So Jenny, Leann's best friend, worked late that day. When she did get home, there was a message from Gloria to call her. And she did, and Gloria told her to come over to the house. So Jenny called her husband at work to pick her up. And on the way over, Jenny kept telling herself, maybe it's a joke. Maybe they won the lottery. But when they pulled up to the Meisner's house and walked up the driveway, both Lindy and Gloria were walking toward her, and Jenny knew it was something horrible. Then she saw Leann's car in the driveway and felt relieved that she must be okay. Then Gloria took her hand. "Mick and Leann went to the gun range today, and Mick shot Leann," Gloria said. Jenny pictured an accidental shooting at the range and thought Leann must be in the hospital. But Gloria told her that Leann was dead, which shocked her and caused her to collapse into her husband's arms. Now, the Meisners had one more visitor that night. That was Mick. They saw him walking up to the door. So either they were unwilling or unable to confront him. They ignored his knocking, hoping it'd go away. He knocked and waited for several minutes. Gloria and Jack said that they were pretty sure he knew they were inside. Finally, Mick said loudly enough through the door for them to hear, "I didn't do this. I'm tired of this bullshit." And then he left.
Yeah, so that's not a very empathetic comment, right?
They've
lost their daughter.
Not going to help you with the in-laws.
No, not at all. Mick's brother, Ben, worked late that day at his job at an auto parts manufacturer, and he got home about 5:45 p.m., and the phone rang immediately, but he decided to let the machine get it. Then he saw in the caller ID that it was Mick's work number at Roy Gruenberg's law firm. So Ben picked up, and it was the secretary. "Ben," she said, "there's been a horrible accident. Leann shot herself." So Ben knew about the recent troubles in his brother's marriage, and his immediate reaction was that maybe Leann had killed herself. But Mick got on the phone and asked him to please come and get him at the lawyer's office. The police had a search warrant to confiscate the clothes Mick had been wearing and to go through the house. So they planned to gather evidence and present their findings the next day to the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office. And they would make the decision about whether or not to charge Mick and issue a warrant for his arrest. When Ben and his wife Nicole walked into the lawyer's office, they saw Mick in a white jumpsuit. Ben went over to give him a hug, and Mick just collapsed into his arms. "They think I did it," Mick said. "They think I've killed my wife. They think I've killed my honey."
So Ben took Mick to his house to get some clothes. They got there about 10 o'clock in the evening. Mick asked Ben if he could get his clothes for him because he couldn't stand to go inside. Now there were 4 police officers inside still searching. Mick stood on the front lawn smoking cigarette after cigarette. Ben stood on one side of him with his arm around him. An officer walked out of the house carrying a blood-soaked square of carpet that had been cut from the bedroom floor. According to Ben, the officer walked in a circle past Mick, held up the carpet, and said, "You're free to go in now." So it's pretty clear that they thought Mick was responsible.
Yeah, and some of that was in part to what Gloria had said, I'm sure.
You let them know.
But Ben did go inside. He walked up the steps into the house, down the hall, and into the bedroom. The sight was horrible, of course, but what really bothered him was the smell of blood. That was just overpowering. As soon as he walked in, it just hit him like a wall. He grabbed some of Mick's clothes as quickly as he could, and they left. Ben drove Mick's car back to his house in Marysville, and Ben's wife Nicole followed in their car. Ben called their parents' house as Mick just sat in the car sobbing.
So John and Darla Fletcher got home around 11:25 that night. Darla went to the answering machine and it had over 20 messages. She listened to one from Ben and she could hear Mick's voice in the background saying, "They're not home." Then the call disconnected, and just then the phone rang and John answered it. Darla could tell there was something wrong just by the look on her husband's face. She picked up another phone and she could hear Ben on the other end saying, "She shot herself, she's dead." 5 minutes later, Ben, Nicole, and Mick were at their door. Mick walked in and collapsed into his father's arms. That night, Mick stared vacantly into space between bursts of crying. Darla wanted to take him to the emergency room, but he wouldn't go. As you might imagine, nobody slept that night.
No, I can't imagine they would.
Dr. Lubisa Dragovic was the chief medical examiner, supposedly one of the best pathologists in the world. He ran the office, but he still liked to do autopsies in homicide cases. He liked to learn things, liked to figure things out and help put bad people in prison. Dragovic was told about Leann's case by the prosecutor's office. People there had told him to be prepared. First, he was told it could be a suicide, that a woman had shot herself. She and her husband were the only ones in the house, and he'd been in the bathroom at the time of the shooting. But Dragovic's suspicions kicked in right away. In many of these cases, the boyfriend and girlfriend are drinking, and suddenly the girlfriend ends up shooting herself using the boyfriend's gun. But the reality often is that the girlfriend didn't shoot herself at all. The boyfriend did it. In this case, Mick was saying it had been an accident. So Dragovic sent his own investigator to the Fletcher house as soon as he heard about the shooting. Bob Rossi, a retired Detroit police officer, took pictures and made notes about the scene.
So let's go over Leann's autopsy findings. I know you have them in front of you.
Yeah, her body was purple from lividity where gravity had pulled her remaining blood downward. Dragovic examined the body externally, then had an assistant take photos before an internal examination was started. He found that her stomach contained about 1,100 milliliters of partially digested food. She was 5'3", 133 pounds, medium nourished with hair 10 inches in length, red-brown in color and saturated in blood. Dragovic was certain of what he was looking at right from the start, even before he'd cleaned out the wound, before he'd figured out the angle of entry into the skull, and before he'd done any measurements. There was a lot of dried blood, but no soot. A self-inflicted wound, one you'd expect to be caused at very close range, leaves soot. So he cleaned her up, shaved her hair from around the right ear, and was immediately able to see a stippling pattern. So stippling is a kind of marking made by unburned gunpowder as it's exploded out of the gun. The larger the pattern, the further away the gun was when it was fired. Tests at a firing range with Fletcher's gun would need to be done, but Dragovic could tell that the gun had been between 12 and 18 inches from Leann's ear when it was fired, and in his opinion, too far away for her to have been the shooter.
Yes, so from shoulder to second knuckle, her arms were 23 inches long. So it would be extremely awkward.
Yes, it would.
So according to Dragovic, he wasn't that excited at the time of the autopsy, but then things got really interesting when investigators found tiny droplets of blood on the cuff of Mick Fletcher's shirt. The shirt was determined to have high-velocity blood spatter, and that would be very problematic for him and his legal counsel.
Certainly would.
Leann's sister, Lisa Felice, showed up at the Fletcher house during the search to pick up the family pets. There was a cat, a rabbit, and a fish. All three would be given to Leann's best friend, Jenny, who was also a big animal lover like Leann had been. Investigators were a bit surprised to find that the Fletcher house was a real mess, really bordering on a hoarder's house that you might have seen on TV or something. Leann was definitely a loving mom, but apparently she didn't make housekeeping a big priority. Clothes were strewn everywhere, the kitchen sink was full of dirty dishes. Each step leading upstairs had a pile of stuff on it. The police were used to some unkept homes, but this was a lot even for them. Mick's office was a real mess. He obviously liked drinking Coke and Busch Light because cans and bottles covered every surface, and some were lying on the floor like they'd just been tossed there. The disarray in the house may have been an indication of chaos in the Fletchers' lives. I find that lives like that are often unorganized and troublesome. They certainly didn't seem organized at all, and it was really hard to imagine how he would get any work done in that mess of a home office. In Mick's desk, the police found copies of the divorce papers that he had filed, and this showed that the marriage had been troubled. They found a shipping bill from Gateway Computers to the Fletcher house, but oddly it wasn't in Mick's name. It was billed to someone named Susan Krazanowski. Detectives knew Sue well from her days as a prosecutor in Oakland County, and now she was a judge in Warren, Michigan. Mick Fletcher was a lawyer there as well. So the receipt may have been work-related, they weren't sure. But then in the office closet, there was a brown accordion-style folder, and this turned out to be a real find. The folder held Hallmark cards, love letters, poems, 3 photos of a woman, and 1 photo of a man. The woman in the photos was Judge Susan. The man was Mick, bare-chested and standing near a lake. So these were definitely personal photos. One of the poems inside had been written on courthouse letterhead. So Susan was apparently part of a love triangle with Mick and Leann. So now one corner of the triangle had been shot to death. The cards written to Mick from the judge were definitely love cards. So one note read in part, "To Mick with all my love, please forgive the massacre of this classic poem. 'Twas the night after Christmas, and all through the home not a creature was stirring, but my mind was a-roam. Pretty garlands were hung by the chimney with care. I admired the stereo wires my love put there. I nestled myself all snug in my bed, while visions of him still danced in my head. Till what did my wondering ears did hear but the sound of my pager drawing me near? With a little old message so lively and quick, I knew in a minute it must be Sir Mick. More rapid than eagles his pages they came. He told me he loved me, and I felt the same. His eyes how they twinkle, his voice makes me sigh. His chest very sexy, his smile puts a sparkle in my eye. His droll little mouth and his lips not to miss, and the bump underneath them that I like to kiss. No, he's not Santa, no reindeer in flight. He is my Sir Michael, my own special knight. He gave me a gift much better than a toy. It is the lesson of faith for true love and joy. His pages are all I can have on this night. I love you, baby." So the last line doesn't rhyme.
No, I mean, it's a nice effort.
Okay.
So Susan wasn't only a judge. She was actually pretty well known, and known as a beauty also, with a lot of power. She was from one of the most politically powerful families in southeastern Michigan. Detectives saw her as destined for great things. She was connected, smart, a respected judge, attractive, and a hard worker who was a rising star in political and judicial circles. But her relationship with the married Mick Fletcher was not smart, not in the least. Now she had to be investigated as a murder suspect.
Not something she would have expected.
Not at all. She had been born and raised for success. In her high school, she had been class president and delivered the commencement address. At the University of Michigan, she was editor of the yearbook. And at Wayne State Law School in downtown Detroit, she graduated magna cum laude, then was hired as an assistant prosecutor in Oakland County. In 1994, just 1 year out of law school, she ran for judge in Warren and lost. Then she ran again 2 years later, and this time she won. And she had surprised everyone with her skill as a judge. She started her court cases on time and was known as a tough, conservative judge. Prosecutors and defense attorneys both liked her. The only imperfection had been her marriage, which had ended in divorce in September of 1998.
So, as we know, blood is really important as evidence in a homicide, especially involving a gunshot. So the different sizes and shapes of blood spatter can really tell the story about what happened with a lot of detail. Forensic scientists measure them, actually dividing the width of a stain by its length, and then taking the cosine of that to figure out the impact angle. This can point to a central focus with the area in 3 dimensions, where the bullet had entered Leann's right ear. The first blood to exit a victim's shooting is called blowback or high-velocity blood spatter. So the bullet enters with such force that immediately it propels a cloud of microscopic blood drops, like an aerosolized mist, back at the shooter. So they would look for that at the scene, and of course on the gun itself. At the same time, Dragovich was looking for blood on Leann's hands. The state police investigators found the mist of blood on the right sleeve of Mick Fletcher's shirt in tests done at the lab. So they looked for other blood that would have spattered more slowly from her wound or even dripped from her nose. This blood would show the direction her body fell after the gunshot. So they also looked for contact stains, where a hand or a foot might have come into contact with Leann's blood and left it on another surface. They found blood on a wall mirror, a computer stand, the carpet, and the bed. Blood forms drops that are perfectly spherical. The teardrop shapes after they hit a surface can show investigators from which direction that blood came. Drops hit a surface and they continue to spread in the direction of movement, leaving what they call a tail. So they looked at blood drops with tails, measuring the width and length, and measured the angles of drops that had hit a surface. Then they posted red string to show the directions that told them part of the story of Leann's death.
Yeah, so their measurements told a more gruesome picture than the blood stain on the carpet had. Indicated that Leann had been shot while she was on her hands and knees, with her head about 14 to 18 inches above the floor and about 10 inches from the bed. When tests on vaginal swabs taken from Leann came back positive for fresh sperm in her vagina, the picture was complete in the minds of the prosecution. They determined that Mick had had sex with his wife from behind while she knelt on her hands and knees. Then just seconds after ejaculating, he had picked up his gun and cold-bloodedly shot Leann in the head.
Well, if that's true, that is really, really cold-blooded.
Sure is.
But then, at her first interview, Susan lied to the police. This eventually caused her to be removed from her position as a judge. She did admit to an affair with Mick, but she said it had been very short-lived, beginning that February and ending in March of 1999. She also said that she hadn't spoken with Mick recently. Susan had originally met Mick at the Warren City Attorney's office. She had heard he was good at wiring and computers, and she had hired him to do some work on her house. At this point, her marriage was already in trouble. And she and Mick grew close during the time he was working for her, and eventually they became lovers. She said they dated only while he'd been separated, but she hadn't dated him since, and he went back to Leann that spring. Susan had heard at the office that Leann had committed suicide, which is why she was distraught and feeling very guilty. After hearing the news, she had left work early for the day and gone to pray in a chapel. But her whole story wasn't ringing true. And what about that "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" poem? Why would she write a Christmas poem in March? She had to be seeing him around Christmas time, obviously. But then Susan did have an alibi for the day that Leann was killed. She'd been at Cedar Point Amusement Park in Ohio all day, and that was with her family members. She didn't get home until 1 a.m. Tuesday morning. Mick had paged her at 7:30 p.m. and left a voicemail telling her that something terrible had happened and she should call the attorney Roy Gruenberg. But Susan said she hadn't called Mick back. It was late when she heard the voicemail, and it didn't make a lot of sense. Mick was being interrogated by homicide detectives, and he's suspected of murdering his wife. So why would he have called a former lover if he hadn't seen her in 5 months?
Good question.
That didn't add up.
Not at all. Susan did hire an attorney. Good idea. She had lied to detectives in the murder investigation, and that's going to get her into trouble. But she had an alibi for the time of the murder, so she was eliminated as a suspect. Small favors.
Yes.
Now, Jenny, Leann's best friend, told Mick's family members something that surprised them. Susan wasn't the first judge Mick had slept with. He also had an affair with the more senior judge named Dawn Gruenberg, the daughter of the attorney and friend who had driven Mick home from the jail. According to Jenny, Mick was Dawn's boy toy, but she had been angry when Mick began working at Susan's house, and she had threatened to damage his legal career if he kept seeing Susan. Mick had ignored the threat, and the judge had sent one of her relatives, customer at the hair salon where Leann worked, to tell Leann that the judge wanted to meet her and tell her about Mick's infidelity.
Yeah, so according to Jenny, Dawn had always been really rude and mean to Leann. Dawn had been Mick's sponsor at his ceremony when he first became a lawyer, and Mick thanked her in his speech but didn't even mention his wife. Leann had been so certain that he was having an affair with Dawn that she had driven by the judge's house several times with hopes of catching them, but she never did. Still, Leann hated Dawn. She hated Dawn so much that she refused to meet with her, even though she was pretty sure the affair was really happening. So Susan and her attorney came in to the Hazel Park police station to set the record straight. In this interview, she admitted that her affair with Mick had been ongoing. She had had sex with him the previous Sunday night, when he'd told her he'd been to church with Leann that morning and gone out to dinner with the Meisners. But he hadn't told her that Leann was pregnant. The detective told Susan that fact. And she admitted talking to him after the murder and said that she had returned his page after she got back from Cedar Point late that night. She said that he had sounded very upset. She said that she was in love with Mick and hoped that they would be a couple after Mick got a divorce from Leann, and she had been assured by Mick that he wasn't having sex with Leann anymore. So here's where we can see if she found out that Leann was pregnant, that lie would be exposed.
Certainly would. Dawn Gruenberg came into the station on Friday with her attorney, and she was interviewed by detectives. She admitted to an affair with Mick, saying it had been short-lived from September to November of 1997 and inconsequential. While it was a sexual relationship, it wasn't love. She did sign a consent form allowing police to search her office and her computer, and she was very critical of Mick. That's an understatement.
She's kind of like a woman scorned in some ways.
Well, I guess. I mean, she's having this affair, starting to, and he gets interested in a younger, better-looking judge.
Sure.
Starts going after her. So, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, I mean, she was angry. She wanted his wife to know. She wanted to cause trouble for him.
Yeah. Dawn said that Mick was a user of people, and she had grown tired of him. He was a heavy drinker, she said, who couldn't handle his alcohol, and was an embarrassing drunk. He was a shitty attorney, too. She had referred her sister-in-law to him for a child custody case, and both she and the sister-in-law were very unhappy with the work he'd done. She said she had sent the same sister-in-law over to Leann's salon to arrange a meeting between her and Leann, but Leann had refused.
Right, so Mick was finally arrested while riding in the car with his father, John, on the way to the funeral home. He was arraigned on first-degree murder charges and sent to Oakland County Jail, where he spent the next 9 months awaiting his trial. He was denied bail. The assistant prosecutor had him identified as a flight risk. And there was a lot of debate over that. Was he really a flight risk?
I don't know. Detroit's right next to Canada.
But would he leave his daughter behind? He did seem like he was a good father. Although I don't know how you can be a good father and kill your wife, but
I was going to point that out.
Aside from the wife killing, he was great.
Okay, good.
But a co-owner of the salon where Leann worked, in the northern Detroit suburb of Sterling Heights, closed for the day after Gloria called to tell her what had happened. When she reopened the next day, she put a container on the counter by the cash register to collect money for Hannah. She also set up a photo next to it, as well as a framed poem titled Remember Me. Later on, they put a sunflower plaque out in front of the store in honor of Leann and her favorite flower. As a nail technician, Leann, who worked in the shop 3 days a week, did manicures, pedicures, paraffin dips, and even freehand artwork on the customers' nails, so she was artistic. And she had a really good way with people, and they trusted her. So people would call in and request her. And of course they were all shocked to hear what had happened to her.
Now, Leann's family made plans for her funeral on Saturday, August 21st. On the Friday before, there are some very dramatic things going on in the courts. That morning, an Oakland County family court awarded temporary custody of 3-year-old Hannah to her maternal grandparents, Jack and Gloria Meisner. Mick was at the hearing in handcuffs. He gave short answers to questions. He was with an attorney, but he didn't try to fight the custody ruling. A request that Mick be allowed to speak to Hannah on the phone was turned down.
Well, I just think that would be difficult.
Oh, very.
I mean, you might want to let her have a little contact just because this whole thing is so upsetting for her and so disruptive, but you don't know what he's going to say or how that's going to be for her. So it wasn't really something they were going to let happen, at least not right away. So after that, the Meisners left for the funeral home, and that afternoon, though, they were told to hurry to the courthouse. A motion had been filed asking that Saturday's scheduled funeral be postponed until an expert hired by the defense could examine Leann's body and come up with his own report. The Meisners were really upset and kind of stunned. They were crying in the courtroom as Assistant County Prosecutor Gregory Townsend argued against this delay. The judge issued an order granting the request for a postponement, and they had 48 hours to arrange for another examination of Leann's body. But they did have to do it on site at the funeral home.
Yeah, that weekend, one of the most prominent pathologists in the United States, Warner Spitz, did a postmortem exam on Leann's body at the funeral home. Then on Monday, August 26th, Leann was buried. More than 300 mourners were there, and many shared stories of how she had touched their lives. TV and radio crews were in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven across their street, pointing their cameras at the mourners as they arrived and then again as they left. Spitz's findings were released a few days later, and his determination was, "It is inconclusive that Miss Fletcher died as a result of homicide. She may have died by her own hand." But you notice he didn't say she couldn't have died as a result of homicide. It's inconclusive.
It was inconclusive, but still, he's giving the defense an out.
Well, sure.
So it certainly helps them.
But that's how it started, though. I mean, her husband said she shot herself.
Right.
So.
But here we have a medical person agreeing that it's possible.
Okay.
Which wasn't something they had before.
I think he's still hedging his bets a little bit.
Yeah. I don't know. It's always kind of iffy because you like to think that this is a person with standards and honesty, but then they're getting paid to have a certain opinion, and that can't not affect what they come up with. It has to have some kind of influence, I feel.
Yeah, it probably could, although this guy Spitz has been around forever and ever.
Yes.
He's quite famous. He doesn't owe anything to the Fletchers.
No, of course not. He doesn't. But being famous doesn't make you good. We know that by many, many, many instances I could show you.
But he is good.
Yes. Well, at Mick's preliminary hearing, Judge Susan and 8 other witnesses testified, including Leann's father and her sister Lindy. Jack Meisner was first and said that Mick and Leann had told them Saturday night that she was pregnant. Then, late Sunday afternoon, they'd all gone out in Jack's van for a steak dinner. After dinner, back at Jack's house, Mick had asked if he would babysit Hannah for an hour during the day Monday, so he could take Leann to the firing range. So that story was unchanged.
Then the next witness was a Paul Yeck, who was the security guard at the hospital. He had seen Mick and Leann at the double-action gun range in Madison Heights on August 16th. He was there testing some new semi-automatic pistols that were used by the hospital's security crew. He said that he saw Leann for less than a minute, but in that time he could tell that she was firing a gun for the first time and that she was startled by the weapon and not comfortable with it. He said she held the weapon in her hand as if it scared her, and she had a surprised look on her face. He also said that the man helping her hold and aim the gun was an older man with gray hair. At the time, Mick was 29 years old with a baby face and a head of thick dark hair. Once again proving the point that eyewitnesses' testimony is probably not the most reliable.
No, but I think it's something that a lot of people believe and find believable, which is what makes it dangerous.
Well, you would expect that an eyewitness is just that. They're going to witness things and tell exactly as they saw it.
Oh, sure, but we know that what we remember is not really reality. We all have different ways of remembering things.
We all perceive things differently.
Yes, right. So even though this guy was probably trying to give an honest account, it seems like he was just kind of making stuff up, maybe subconsciously.
Yeah, although maybe he was an employee of the shooting range who was helping Leann.
That's possible. But can you really tell by looking at her that it's the first time? You might be able to tell she's not experienced.
No.
But how do you know it's not the second or third time?
You don't.
You don't. So Ron Lehman, a Hazel Park police officer, testified that he was dispatched to the Fletcher's house after that 911 call. He arrived and found Mick on the front lawn smoking a cigarette and holding a cell phone. He described the strong smell of gunpowder once he got into the house, the condition that he found Leann's body in, and also a very thorough description of the bedroom, the whole scene there.
Dragovich, the county medical examiner, testified that he performed the autopsy on Leann's body the next day, and she was, in his opinion, a homicide victim. The conclusion was reached on the pattern of gunpowder burns, which you were describing as a stippling previously, on her face. The tighter the pattern, the closer the shot. So the pattern on her face led the medical examiner to believe that she had been shot from 12 to 18 inches away, making self-infliction impossible. He also said he could find no traces of blood on her hands. And we've already talked about that you would expect a mist of blood on the hand of someone who has just shot herself. And he testified to the finding of seminal fluid in her vagina.
But remember, they didn't put bags over her hands.
No, they didn't.
Well, he described in clinical terms the damage done to Leann by the bullet, which I just found fascinating. He said that the wound path went through the skin of the right ear and subcutaneous tissue. It fragmented the right temporal bone, a bone that's an integral part of the human skull, that's on the right side and includes the middle ear and also a squamous part of the right side of the skull. He said that this was perforated with a shattering of the petrous part of the skull, the hard, dense bone where the middle ear is.
And the bullet perforated the hard coverings of the brain that divides the front part of the skull from the back lower portion of the skull. It injured the right cerebellum, which is the small part of the brain, and it transected the upper part of the brainstem and tore the left side of the cerebellum. So it goes through the whole cerebellum and cuts the brainstem, the upper part of the brainstem, in half.
So instant death.
Pretty much instant. The injury, he concluded, caused instantaneous damage to the brain stem and would have rendered that person immediately unconscious, and within seconds there would be the cessation of all the vital functions in the rest of the body. So as you said, boom, you're gone. You don't even register that you're gone.
Well, and I guess that's a blessing, you could say. Everybody wants a quick, painless death.
Well, that certainly would be. Now, David Woodford of the Michigan State Police Crime Lab testified that from examining the bloodstains in the room, he determined that Leann had been shot while on the floor. Her head had been about a foot from the bed and between 14 to 18 inches off of the floor. He said that sperm in her vagina was fresh, and that fresh blood was found in the trap of the bathroom sink drain.
Well, this is just a picture of horrid events taking form here. Leann had been kneeling on the floor, having just had sex with her husband with her head bowed down, when she was shot to death. Her killer then just washed his hands in the bathroom sink afterwards before calling 911. And we know, who could that killer be? It had to be her husband.
There's only one other person there. It's her husband.
So it just gives us this picture of him having sex with her, pretty much just turning around right afterwards and shooting her.
Yeah.
How does a person do that? And he knew she was pregnant as well.
Right.
So this is really a heinous, heinous crime.
It's horrendous.
It really is.
So Sergeant Tom Clayman of the Hazel Park Police testified that when the Meisners arrived at the police station that day, Gloria told him right off that Mick had killed her daughter. He said that Mick had told him he was having trouble loading a clip for the gun and asked Leann to do it. She's not used to guns. Why would you do that? That's a suspicious story anyway.
Well, it is, and her family and friends all said she wouldn't want anything to do with that. She would have told him, no, you put it down and do it when you get back. Why would he ask her to do that?
Right.
She wouldn't have done it, is pretty much what they said.
Yeah. Mick said she must have tried to load the gun while he was in the bathroom. Claimant's testimony was compelling evidence of Mick's guilt.
To me it is, because I just don't see that as something that would have happened.
No.
It doesn't make sense that he would ask her to do that. And they just had sex, so it's not like they just walked in the door. So it's very fishy.
Yeah, if you look at the time, I mean, it was like they got home, and within 15 minutes they'd had sex, and she was shot and dead. He had cleaned up and called 911.
Yeah.
A lot happened in that short time.
It sure did. So Judge Susan Krazanowski's testimony was really fascinating. For 20 minutes, she gave the details of her affair with Mick. She'd met him while campaigning for office in 1996, and their relationship had gotten more serious after her divorce in August of 1998. But later, evidence would emerge that seemed to show their affair started earlier than that while she was still married. So this discrepancy in her testimony would later be one of the reasons the state's Judicial Tenure Commission would cite in trying to have her booted from the bench. So she wasn't really wanting to come completely clean. She came clean in phases.
Yeah.
Which she definitely knew better. She's a judge.
Like most people would do, you know?
Yeah, but she should know better, really.
Well, she should.
And this is the kind of thing where it's not like shoplifting or something. You really need to be totally honest about things because you're talking about a murder case and they're going to find out pretty much everything.
Yes, they are.
So there's no point trying to hide it.
No. Come clean and fess up, as tough as it is.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you don't have anything to hide as far as the crime itself.
You know, what you're going to be doing by telling the truth is opening yourself up for criticism that you were screwing another woman's husband.
Well, it's a little more than that for her because she could get in trouble with her job. But still, that's all minor in comparison to a murder trial.
So as expected, the court found that there was probable cause to bind Mick Fletcher for trial in Oakland County Circuit Court. He was let out in handcuffs and returned to his jail cell.
So prosecutors considered 3 separate motives in the months after this arrest. The only one that would be brought into the trial was that Mick loved another woman, and that love would have been jeopardized if Susan found out that Leann was pregnant. So the idea that Mick was addicted to porn and that he wanted custody of Hannah was set aside as a motive. The third motive, that Mick stood to collect a large settlement from a malpractice suit, and that Leann wanted that to be part of their divorce settlement, was also set aside and not used in the trial. Those just didn't seem like strong enough motives for the murder. Although a lot of people would argue that the motive they came up with didn't seem strong enough for a murder either.
No, it didn't.
To me it does. I can see it. If he's really desperate not to lose this other woman, and plus he doesn't want to be with Leann and have another child with her, and he's a selfish bastard, I could see him doing that.
Well, yeah, but the other 2 reasons don't stand up.
No, the other 2 don't.
So what no one in the media knew was that the fear of pornography affecting a potential child custody case in divorce couldn't have been a motive. The police did find some porn, but some of it was of Mick and Leann together. And there are some very explicit sexual photos that had been taken by Leann.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh. And by the time Mick's trial began, Leann's friend Jenny had put together a chronology of the lows in the Fletcher's marriage. Most of this had no significance in Mick's murder trial. However, the Michigan Judicial Tenure Commission used her timeline in helping to build its case for removing Judge Susan from the bench.
The Fletcher murder case had national media attention right from the beginning. Court TV aired his arraignment. The show 2020 booked family members on both sides for an hour-long news special, and that came out after the trial. So leading up to his trial, these things were assumed about the marriage between Leann and Mick. Leann saved up her own money and bought the house that Mick moved into after they got married. Leann put Mick through law school with her earnings as a phone solicitor or nail technician. Mick was a loner and didn't have any friends. He didn't even have anyone come to his wedding. Mick always had to have the best. His Dakota truck, for example, had to have the special bed liner, had to have this fancy gizmo to get rid of the smoke from his cigarettes, and had to have the best sound system. Mick spent no time with his daughter unless he wanted to put on a show for Leann's family. Mick was lazy. First, he was content to let Leann work while he went to school. Then he was this underachieving attorney who'd rather sit in his room watching pornography on the computer than make a living for his family. But these perceptions are actually not completely true. So what was the reality of this?
Well, point by point, Leann didn't buy the house. Her name was the only one appearing on the loan because Fletcher had to finance his way through law school, and he was afraid that if the loan for his house was in his name too, it might damage his ability to get enough student loans. Second was that Fletcher had always worked, from the time he got his first job when he was at Marysville High. Summer before they got married, he worked full-time at a machine shop in Lexington and spent his paychecks buying furniture and appliances for the house. He did have friends at the wedding. His brother Ben was his best man. He had other friends in attendance and would have had more, except the Meisners insisted that the Fletchers cut their initial wedding invitation list down to 75. He had bought his Dakota truck several months before the shooting, but it was the first new vehicle he'd ever owned. Leann always had the better vehicles. Mick couldn't trade vehicles with her when he needed something nicer to drive because his truck was a manual shift and she never learned how to drive one. Now Mick seemed to his friends and family to be an attentive dad. He built a computer file for Hannah called The Pontificating 2-Year-Old and filled it with VeggieTales and Barney videos. During his separations from Leann, Mick took Hannah every Saturday.
Yeah, so it seems like a lot of people were trying to make him out to be just this bad guy. And sometimes you can be a bad guy, but it doesn't mean you're bad in all respects. It goes back to what we were saying about him being a good father. He did seem like a good father. Of course, after he committed this crime, you could no longer call him a good father.
Well, it's tough to say, even though he killed his wife, he was a good dad.
Exactly. That just doesn't make sense. But you can see in the years before this, he did seem like a fairly decent man in many ways. And this is something that the Meisners, for emotional reasons, they couldn't admit to that. Once somebody's bad, it's easy to just paint them all bad, right?
Yeah, we'll deal with absolutes. On June 6, 2000, after months of delays, the case of the people of the state of Michigan versus Michael Fletcher began. DNA tests on the presumed blood mist stains on Mick's green cotton Oxford shirt, which would prove that he was near Leann when she was shot and not in the bathroom, had finally come back from the busy Michigan State Police crime lab. The report came back, but the test didn't show a positive match between the blood mist that could only have come from shooting Leann at close range and Leann's actual DNA. The prosecution used the test anyway. The DNA didn't match because the sample was too small, but it was human blood.
Well, and who else's blood could it have been but Leann's?
Right.
So I still think it's very good evidence.
Yeah, I do too.
So Leann's mom, Gloria, testified that she believed Mick had been kind and loving to Leann in the months before her death because it was part of his plan to kill her. She told how, just before Easter of 1999, during one of their separations, Mick had sent a basket of flowers to the salon where Leann worked, begging her to take him back. From then on, she said, he'd gone overboard with love. He did things he never did before, including kissing her in public. He just seemed filled with affection. He was helping her carry the baby things, which he'd never done before. And she described how Mick and Leann came over that Easter Sunday, and Mick did something he'd never done before. He helped Leann carry their stuff out of the house, and he took the garbage out. So the defense was really wanting the jury to see Gloria as an angry mother-in-law, and Mick could just do nothing right in her eyes. She got angry when he took out the garbage, and she thought that he was being nice after a separation just for show. It really just shows that maybe she hated him. The defense also made sure that the jury knew that Gloria would likely get permanent custody of her granddaughter Hannah if Mick was convicted, so maybe that was part of the reason she was pointing the blame at him.
Well, okay. It's a little far-fetched to me.
Well, it's what the defense is trying to do
Yeah,
something
I know.
here. We do know that Gloria immediately said he did it, and she didn't know he did it.
No, she didn't.
No.
Judge Susan was the star witness as far as courtroom observers were concerned. She testified that despite Mick's romantic instability with her and with his wife, she did expect to have a long-term relationship with him in the near future. Mick repeatedly broke up with the judge to move back with his wife. Then he would leave his wife to be with Susan. Her divorce was finalized in August of 1998. Then she was sure that she and Mick had a life ahead of them as a couple. By October, Mick and Leann were separated, and he and the judge were together again. Then in November, he moved back in with Leann. Then in January, he filed for divorce and moved out again. Then in March, he went back to Leann. Now this final time, Judge Susan took the things he had kept at her house and gave them to him in a garbage bag. But each time he left her for his wife, Susan forgave him. In June, they had resumed their sexual relationship and continued to get together 3 times a week until Leann died. Susan seemed willing to forgive him for anything.
Yeah, I think so. And I just have to wonder if he was found not guilty, would she have been with him still?
Good point.
I think it's a possibility. He seemed to really have kind of a spell over these women. Susan had told Mick that he could do whatever he had to do for his daughter, but that if he had sex with Leann, his relationship with her was over. The last night Mick and she had sex, the night before Leann was killed, Mick told her he loved her. And he told her that he'd been out for dinner with Leann and her parents. But of course he didn't mention that they'd gone out to dinner to celebrate Leann's pregnancy. A state police crime scene investigator and member of the blood spatter team that analyzed the Fletcher's bedroom testified that there were several types of blood patterns that were found. She showed them with drawings on whiteboards using real blood and a pair of scissors for the demonstration. She dipped the scissors in blood and then, holding on to one end, flicked them in front of a board. The pattern of drops that flew off and landed was called a cast-off pattern. If the scissors with blood on them touched a surface then, they left a transfer or contact stain. If blood dripped from them under the force of gravity and landed on the board, that created a passive drop. If blood fell and then was walked on or wiped in some way, that would leave a wipe pattern. So she showed the jurors how a drop of blood forms different shapes when it hits the surfaces at different angles. At the crime scene, she had seen a large contact blood stain on the bedspread, high-velocity blood mist on the wall mirror, and lots of blood on the computer stand. They looked for blood drops consistent with projected blood. The object was to find various drops around the room that had been flung out from the body, which left a tail when they hit and splattered. Another forensic investigator ran an analysis on the goo removed from the drain trap in the bathroom sink, and this tested positive for the presence of blood as well. So this meant that someone had washed blood off of his hands recently. So that's bad news for Mick.
Yes, it is. On Friday, June 23rd, the jury heard the dramatic 911 call that Mick Fletcher had made after Leann had been shot. The prosecution had fought against this being played in front of the jury and entered into a court record. But the defense won that argument.
Which is funny because it didn't really end up helping them. It kind of backfired.
The courtroom fell quiet as the tape began to play. Mick sounded hysterical on the call, but there was nothing that really stood out as acting or pretending to be distressed. The only odd thing was that he hadn't tried to hold his wife or even stay in the room with her.
Yeah, what do you think of that? Do you think that different people handle that differently, or do you feel like if you love someone, you're not going to leave them there?
Well, I think if it's gruesome enough, you might not want to be there. You don't want to look at your wife that way.
I suppose. It's just, to me, I think the instinct is to stay with the person you love and to hope for a miracle and not to leave them there.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Yeah.
But I'm not terribly upset with Mick for not wanting to be there.
No, I mean, he could just be kind of a dick and not be the murderer.
Could be that too.
But after the case was presented from both sides and closing remarks were finished, the judge instructed the jurors that they must not consider the fact that Mick didn't testify as evidence of his guilt. Also, that they were free to believe or disbelieve any witness as they saw fit. She told them that first-degree murder required 4 elements: that the defendant caused the death, that the defendant intended to kill, that the act was premeditated, even if just for seconds ahead of time, and, of course, that it was deliberate. Under Michigan law, even though Mick Fletcher was charged with first-degree murder, the jury could find him guilty of the lesser charge of second-degree murder.
The jury came back after 4 days with a verdict of guilty of second-degree murder. The second-degree finding was much more of a shock than the guilty verdict. Both the prosecution and the defense presented a first-degree murder case, so it was difficult to understand what the jury was thinking. It almost seemed like a compromise. Absolutely.
Yeah. After hearing the victim impact statements from Leann's family and friends before sentencing, the judge said, "I've spent 22 years on this bench, and I've presided over innumerable trials involving all manner of heinous crimes. In all these years, I've never seen a crime so incredibly cold-blooded or heartless. You killed your wife, who was pregnant with your child. Your daughter Hannah will live her whole life without her mother. The jury didn't believe you and the story you told to the police, and I don't either. I don't understand what kind of monstrous arrogance caused you to think you could get away with murder, and I don't have any doubts about how to sentence you. It is the sentence of this court that you be sentenced to life in prison." So at this point, Leann's family members jumped up and hugged each other. John and Darla Fletcher, Mick's parents, slumped and just looked stricken. Mick was quickly led from the court as reporters and camera crews surrounded the Meisners. And Lindy yelled out at Mick, "Goodbye, Mick," like a sarcastic thing. So that was interesting.
It was. That December, Judge Susan was found not guilty of judicial misconduct. The Macomb County prosecutor, who had filed charges against her because of her dismissal of drunk driving charges against one of Fletcher's clients, said, "I feel bad I ever got the whole thing rolling. It did cross the line, but this was not a person who was trying to duck and hide and weave. She took full responsibility, and she understands what she did was wrong."
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. Kind of feel like they let her off the hook there.
Yeah, they did.
But the Meisner and Fletcher families had a very bitter custody battle after that over Hannah. Mick's parents saw her for only 2 hours between the time of Leann's death and the end of 2000. A court order was granted, and the Fletchers were allowed to see Hannah with weekend visits on alternate weekends. But the County Family Independence Agency began an investigation into allegations of child abuse by the Fletchers. Those files are all closed, so I don't know the details of that. But in the meantime, while this was going on, their visits were suspended. No evidence of abuse was found, but the court was not willing to give custody of Hannah to the parents of her mother's murderer. Then at a hearing in August, Mick's parental rights were terminated. Still, though, his parents fought to be able to see Hannah. And finally, the Meisners and the Fletchers agreed that they would allow visits with the Fletchers. The Meisners really didn't want to keep Hannah from knowing her other grandparents, but they made the Fletchers agree not to talk about Mick's innocence with the child, or the visitations would stop. The Meisners did finally adopt Hannah, and after that was final, they made plans to have Leann's sister, Lindy, adopt and raise Hannah.
The Fletchers still believe in their son's innocence. Mick Fletcher has appealed on 6 different issues, including juror misconduct. According to his defense, the jury had done experiments during deliberations. And as far as the experiments went, they were found to be nothing more than reenactments. The appeals court ruled against all 6 issues. Now, even though jurors came up with a guilty verdict, some of them showed doubt afterwards.
Kind of a lot of doubt. I found this really fascinating.
So the week after the trial, the producers of 2020 Downtown TV show got 10 of the jurors to participate in a reenactment of their deliberations. What 2020 showed was very sympathetic to Mick, even implying that he had been railroaded. The jurors said that the evidence was weak and that prosecution witnesses were incompetent, unreliable, or flat-out lying. They also said that the motive was not believable.
Yeah, and I don't see why. I think it's quite believable. I mean, people kill for love. That's one of the main motives.
Yeah. and the Meisners were certain that Leann could not have shot herself. Jurors agreed with them, but they disagreed with everything else that the prosecution had presented.
Yes, I guess in the end they believed that he was guilty, but they didn't really believe how the case was put together by the prosecution, that a lot of that just wasn't right. And that's why I feel like it was a compromise to go with the second-degree murder, because there's nothing that shows it was second-degree murder in my mind.
No.
If Leann died as a result of this unlikely, horrible accident, then Mick Fletcher, I guess, is just this very unlucky guy. But if he killed his wife, he's just absolutely evil and should have been convicted of first-degree murder. The defense never argued second-degree murder as a choice, nor did the prosecution. There was no evidence presented for that.
No. But in the end, Leann's death was a tragedy for two families.
That's true.
One lost a daughter, the other family lost a son. And of course, Hannah lost the most, neither parent.
Well, yeah, I mean, like pretty much any other murder, nobody wins. It's just a tragedy. So the sources for this episode: The People vs. Fletcher from the Michigan Court of Appeals documents. A Deadly Affair, a book written by Tom Henderson. There's a Forensic Files episode. There's also an episode of American Justice titled Love Triangle. And try as I might, I could never find a recording of that 2020 show to watch. So if anybody finds a link for that, I would love to get it so I could take a look at that. TCB's music was written and produced by Tristan Capel. If you enjoy listening to our shows, please consider leaving us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen. It's a small thing, takes just a few minutes, but we really appreciate it and it helps a lot.
Before entering into feedback, I just want to mention the TCB store. We're done with Thanksgiving. Hanukkah, Christmas, and Kwanzaa are looming straight ahead. If you're looking for a gift or a stocking stuffer, check out the TCB store. T-shirts, both long and short-sleeved, and because we're in partnership with TeePublic, prices are very reasonable and the quality is high. Check it out.
It really is. I like their sweatshirts and T-shirts. I have a handful of them.
I'm wearing one right now.
You are. Also, I just wanted to mention something we haven't mentioned in a while, which is our newsletter. We do have one coming out this month. Try and do it quarterly. I'm not always that great about it. But one thing I haven't asked for in a while is I'd really like some of our listeners to write us with some reviews on books or TV shows they've watched, or just opinions on crimes, anything, just that will be of interest to our listeners. I mean, right now, Dick and I write things on it, but I would like it to be more of a community effort. So if you have anything you'd like to write and share with us in our newsletter, after the December one, there'll be one coming out by March, hopefully, and we'd love to put some contributions from listeners into that newsletter. So if you want to do that, you can just send it to us in an email, and that is truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com. We also love voicemails, as you know, so feel free to do that too.
Speaking of voicemails, we have one for feedback, and this is a case suggestion from Dara.
Hi Jill and Dick, greetings from Ireland. Thank you for sending over the parcel which I got for signing up. I love your podcast. Just an idea for a show for you. It's an Irish one. If you look up Elaine O'Hara, she was murdered by someone called Graham Dwyer. And there's a good book called The Almost Perfect Murder by Paul Williams. And it's a fascinating story insofar as it went unsolved for quite a while. Then they found a mobile phone in a reservoir that still contained messages, and it linked it to an architect, Graham Dwyer. And you should check it out. Thanks for the show. I love it. I listen all the time. Thanks.
Thanks, Dara. I just think it's really cool when we get people from other countries, and the accents are nice.
You love the accent.
I do love the accent. And I think we've only done less than a handful of Irish cases, maybe 2 or 3, over the past, 5 years.
Right.
Yeah.
They've been underrepresented, I guess.
Absolutely. Well. Yeah, but I'm going to get the book and read it, Dara, and hopefully we'll do an episode on it. And thanks for joining Tie Grabber.
Yeah, so just a quick thing about this that really drew me in. When Elaine O'Hara went missing from her home in Dublin in 2012, the assumption was that she had killed herself. She had suffered from depression and was last seen visiting her mother's grave. Her remains were found about a year later. An investigation revealed that she had actually been groomed by the killer to allow him to kill her.
Can you explain that a little further? Because that's a hell of a sentence you just dropped.
So he groomed this young lady to the point where he said, "I want to kill you," and she was going to allow him to do that.
And that's because she was so depressed, maybe.
Right.
That's so sad.
Isn't it?
Yeah, that's horrible.
That was an interesting thing.
Yes, definitely something different that I'm definitely going to read about. So we have an email case suggestion from Carol, and Carol writes, Trooper Bob was a Minnesota state trooper in Ottertail County in the 1970s and 80s. He was friendly, personable, and would even give you a ride home if he caught you driving drunk. He often stopped in tiny Vargas, Minnesota, population 387, to have coffee with my dad and a few other characters in town. Everyone liked Trooper Bob, even the partiers and hellraisers. He and his family moved to Texas and became involved with a religious group that bordered on being a cult. Next we heard he was going to prison for child sexual assault and the murder of the Minnesota woman mentioned in the article below. That was a punch in the gut for hundreds of people in Minnesota who knew Bob. Finding information on this case would require a lot of digging, but it's complex enough that Texas newspapers probably covered it thoroughly. Minnesota has a lot of good breweries. That's true.
That is true.
So I think it's funny about how he would gather with other characters in town to have coffee, because our little town in Maine we used to live in, we'd go to the bagel basket for our coffee and bagels, and there's always a group of older guys at a table.
Yeah, they had their own table. This is an interesting case also. The murdered woman was Michelle Yvette Boucher. She was 18 years old, was killed while hitchhiking in 1980. Now, she was unidentified, buried in an unmarked grave. She was unidentified until 2015, when there was a DNA match. Robert Leroy Nelson, Trooper Bob, confessed to the crime. He was in prison for the previously mentioned child sexual assault, and he confessed to this murder.
Yeah, so sometimes the bad guys don't seem like bad guys right away, do they?
Nope.
They can fool you. So the next is a case suggestion from Chris. Why don't you go ahead and read it? It's very short.
It is short. Just a quick case suggestion for you. Marty Hill and Brian Pennington. Marty was brutally attacked and left for dead by Pennington. The thing is, Marty survived. Keep up the good work. And she was attacked quite brutally, left for dead. She did write a memoir titled Millimeter from Murder, and it's a fascinating, gory read.
Story of survival, though.
Yes, it is.
Yep. So this occurred in Nebraska?
I mean, Chris is in Nebraska.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe it happened where he is, but not necessarily.
No.
Or she. Chris could be a boy or a girl. Well, thank you, Chris. And thank you, Carol, and thank you, Dara, and thank you, everyone, for listening to us today. We really appreciate it. Your time's important. There's lots of stuff you can do with it, and the fact that you choose to spend this time with us really warms my heart.
Mine too.
Yeah. So we'll see you next time at the quiet end.
Yeah, we got some more of this Canadian breakfast stout. I'm going to cork it up and leave it for tomorrow, because I've had plenty today.
Yeah, I'm going to take a nap.
Yeah. All right, guys. See you at the quiet end.
Bye-bye.
Bye.